Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime. This podcast explores real cases involving violence, loss, and the darker side of human nature. Some details may be confronting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Two little girls sit waiting in a running car. The heater is on. Their seatbelts are fastened. The engine hums quietly in the winter afternoon. Their mum has walked back inside the house. She said she'd only be a moment, so they wait. They watch the front door. They expect to see her walk back out, because that's what mums do. They come back. But this time, she doesn't. A single shotgun blast breaks the quiet of a rural property south of Perth. And in that moment, everything changes. For the girls sitting in the car, for the family waiting for them to arrive, for everyone who knew Amy Wensley. This is a story of a young mother whose death would leave behind a question that still has no complete answer. What happened to Amy? Before there was an investigation, before there were forensic reports, before there were questions about evidence and timelines, there was a person, Amy Lee Wensley, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mother. And to understand why her story continues to matter, we need to go back before the headlines, before her name became connected to one of Western Australia's most debated deaths. We need to meet Amy. Amy was born on the 11th of February 1990. She was the eldest of three girls. From a young age, those who knew her described someone who naturally stepped into the role of protector. The oldest child, the one who helped, the one who looked after the younger ones, the one who noticed when someone wasn't okay. Those roles often become part of who people are. And long before Amy became a mother herself, she was already someone who cared for others, someone who took responsibility, someone who put people first. When Amy's family eventually moved from New South Wales to Western Australia, she grew up surrounded by the kind of environment that she loved. Open spaces, the outdoors, time spent outside, camping, fishing, being near the water. She wasn't someone who needed a complicated life. The simple moments mattered. The days spent with family, the memories made with people that she loved, the ordinary moments that often become the ones people treasure the most after someone's gone. Friends and family remember Amy in similar ways. Funny, loyal, strong-willed, honest. Someone who could be stubborn when she believed in something. Someone who felt things deeply. Someone who loved fiercely. But perhaps the thing that stood out most was how much she loved children. Long before she became a mother, she was the person who gravitated towards the younger kids at family gatherings. The person who entertained them. The person that made sure that they were included. And that love would become one of the defining parts of her life. Because Amy became a mother while she was still incredibly young. At just 17 years old, Amy welcomed her first daughter. For many people that age, life is still about discovering who they are, figuring out the future, making plans. But Amy's life changed overnight. Suddenly, another person depended on her. The late nights, the early mornings, the responsibilities and decisions. Everything became about someone else. Those who knew Amy said becoming a mother gave her a sense of purpose. Her daughter became the centre of her world. Amy wasn't perfect. No parent is. She was young and she was learning. She was growing alongside her child, but the love was obvious. And for Amy, being a mum wasn't just something she did. It became part of who she was. Like many young relationships, the relationship with Shanaya's father eventually ended. Amy experienced heartbreak. The future that she'd imagined changed. But she continued forward. She worked. She raised her daughter. And she relied on family for support. She did what many young parents do. She adapted. She kept going. Then, in 2009, Amy met David Simmons. At the time, Amy was working at the Armadale Tavern. David was a customer who kept returning. Over time, a relationship developed. And by the end of that year, Amy was pregnant again. In June 2010, their daughter Talia was born. Now Amy had 2 little girls. 2 children who would become the centre of her life. From the outside, things appeared to be settling. There were family photographs, birthday celebrations, and camping trips. Everyday moments are captured forever. The kind of photographs families take without ever imagining they will one day become memories of a life interrupted. A child's birthday, a family gathering, a smile, a moment together. Photographs preserve what happened in front of the camera, but they don't show what happens when the camera is put away. They don't show the conversations behind closed doors, the worries, the disagreements, the struggles, the moments nobody sees. By 2014, Amy, David and their 2 daughters were living in a small home on David's father's property in Serpentine, south of Perth. It was a quiet location, a rural property surrounded by open land, away from busy streets, away from neighbours close by. For some people, that kind of isolation feels peaceful. For others, it can become lonely. Life on the property was meant to provide stability, a way to save money, a way to build towards something better. But the relationship was becoming increasingly difficult. There were arguments, there was stress, there were pressures that seemed to build. Friends and family noticed changes in Amy. She seemed different, quieter, more withdrawn, less like the person that they knew before. They also noticed David's drinking and drug use. They saw how he changed when he was intoxicated. There were problems within the relationship, and they became worried about what was happening behind closed doors. Amy had begun thinking about leaving. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. She spoke with people she trusted. She talked about wanting somewhere else, somewhere calmer, somewhere her daughters could simply grow up, somewhere without the constant tension that she felt she was living with. She just wanted a fresh start. And she was beginning to believe that that future might actually be possible. She had hopes, plans, a reason to look ahead. But Amy would never get the chance to begin that next chapter, because on a cold afternoon in 2014, everything changed. The final day of Amy Wensley's life began like any other, ordinary. A day nobody knew would become the last. Thursday, the 26th of June, 2014. For most people, it's just another date. A Thursday in winter. A day of ordinary routines, school, work, conversations, and plans. Nobody wakes up that morning knowing it will become the day they remember forever. Nobody knows that by the end of that afternoon, a family will be changed permanently. Those two little girls will lose their mother. That property in Serpentine will become the centre of a question that will remain unanswered for years. But for Amy Wensley, the morning begins like any other. She wakes up, she spends time with her daughters, and she moves through the routines of motherhood. Breakfast, getting ready for school, the small everyday moments that make up family life. The moments that people rarely notice while they are happening. But those are often the moments that people miss the most when someone is gone. The ordinary ones. The ones that seemed like they would happen again tomorrow. Amy's eldest daughter, Shania, is old enough to have school routines. Her youngest daughter, Talia, is still little. Still at the age where mum is the centre of everything. The person who provides comfort, the person who makes the world feel safe. That morning, there is no indication that anything is about to happen. No warning, no obvious sign that this will be the last normal day they share with their mother. And perhaps that's what makes the day so difficult to understand. Because tragedy rarely arrives announcing itself. It often hides inside ordinary moments. Nancy, Amy's mum, spoke with her on the phone that morning. There was nothing in Amy's voice that hinted at what the day would become. No trembling, no panic. Just an ordinary conversation between mother and daughter. The kind that disappears into the background of life almost as soon as it ends. When Nancy hung up, she had no reason to believe that she had just heard her daughter's voice for the last time. The ordinary is often the cruelest part. That day, Amy spent time with her friend Rachel Price and their children. They shopped together, returned to Amy's house around lunchtime, baked treats and prepared for a barbecue planned for later that evening. The house carried the small sounds of children watching television, women talking in the lounge room, ovens warming the air. It looked like a life being built, not a life about to end. They spoke about wedding plans. Amy talked about wanting her daughter Shania to share the family surname after the wedding. It was a conversation about belonging, about family, about the future. Amy still appeared calm, and she seemed in good spirits. Nothing suggested that death was already moving silently through the house. After that day, Rachel never saw her again. Looking back, those moments become painful. Not because they were dramatic, because they weren't. There was no final goodbye, no sense that time was running out. It was just an ordinary afternoon. Later that day, David Simmons returns to the property, and slowly the mood begins to change. An argument starts. A relationship already under pressure reaches another breaking point. There are raised voices, emotion, conflict. The moment where everything that has been building seems to come to the surface. At some point during the confrontation, the argument becomes physical. She had thrown a beer at him and punched him in the mouth, and David had grabbed her by the throat and thrown her to the ground. Amy makes a decision. She's leaving. Whether she believed this would be permanent, whether she had reached a point where she knew she could not stay, or whether she simply needed to get away from the situation at that moment, only Amy knew. But she begins packing. Packing to leave is something most people can imagine. It's rarely a dramatic moment. It's usually practical. A bag, some clothes, important belongings. The things that you reach for when you know you need to go, even if you haven't worked out every detail of what comes next. Amy begins gathering what she needs. At 5 o'clock, Nancy rang again after arriving home from work. This time, Amy answers in tears. Nancy has never heard her daughter cry like that before. Amy was hysterical, struggling to speak through sobs. She said that she and David had had a terrible fight. Nancy was horrified. Amy had only recently recovered from a neck injury that she suffered in a car accident. She was furious and frightened. Nancy told her to pack her things and come immediately. Stay the night, stay for weeks, stay for months, just come. Amy agreed. And then she does something that will become one of the most heartbreaking details of the entire story. She gets her daughters ready to leave. The girls climb into the car, the doors close. Their seatbelts click into place and the engine starts. The heater begins pushing warm air through the vents against the cold winter afternoon. From their perspective, nothing about this feels unusual. They're going somewhere with Mum. They don't know this is different. They're simply waiting. The car is still running. Everything is ready. She just has to drive away. But she doesn't. Instead, Amy gets out of the car and she walks back towards the house. This is where the timeline becomes difficult, because the person who could explain those final moments is no longer here. Why did Amy go back inside? Was she collecting something that she had forgotten? Was there something that she needed? Was there another conversation that needed to happen? Was there another reason entirely? The front door remains closed. Inside the house, Amy enters the bedroom. And sometime that afternoon, she picks up her phone. She opens the camera and she takes a photograph. One single image. One moment frozen in time. The photograph shows Amy inside the bedroom. There is a shotgun visible. At that moment, nobody knows that the image exists. Nobody knows it will later become one of the most discussed pieces of evidence connected to her death. Nobody knows that people will spend years asking the same question. Why? Why did Amy take that photograph? Was it meant for someone? Was it a message? Was it something else? The truth is, the photograph can show us what was captured, but it can't tell us what Amy was thinking. That's something that only she could have answered. Outside, two little girls continue waiting. They're expecting their mother to return. Then, a sound. A single shotgun blast. The quiet property is suddenly filled with noise. The girls hear it, but they don't understand it. How could they? They're children. They have no reason to believe that their mother will not walk back out that door. They wait. But the door never opens. Meanwhile, Nancy is waiting. 20 minutes pass, then 30. By 5:30 p.m, Nancy was worried. She began calling Amy repeatedly. The phone rang unanswered. Again and again she tried, each call swallowed by silence. A mother sat waiting for headlights that never appeared. What Nancy didn't know was that while she was reaching for the phone, while she was listening to unanswered rings and imagining delays, traffic, tears, or another argument, Amy was already dead. The house that had smelled of baking that afternoon had become a crime scene before the evening had even begun. The barbecue guests would never arrive. The wedding plans would never be discussed again. Loved ones searching for meaning in a day that seemed to split in two, before 5 o'clock and after. And somewhere between an ordinary morning phone call and a mother waiting by the window at dusk, a life vanished into darkness. The sound of the shotgun blast changed everything. For the two little girls sitting in the car, time almost stopped. They had been waiting for their mother to come back. They had no way of understanding what had just happened inside the house. They only knew that Mum had gone inside and Mum hadn't come back out. The first emergency call did not come from inside the house. It came from David Simmons, who had left the property and travelled to the Serpentine Falls Roadhouse area before contacting emergency services. When the 000 operator answered, David was distressed. He reported that Amy had shot herself. He said that she was not breathing, and he asked for help. For emergency operators, this was now a race against time. An ambulance was needed. Police were needed. Someone needed to get Amy. David then drove the girls to Nancy's house. When he arrived, he told her simply, "Amy's dead." A second call was made to David's father, Robert. He was asked to check on what happened while emergency services were responding. Robert made his way toward the home. He entered the property, and what he saw would stay with him forever. Amy was inside. She had suffered a gunshot wound. The situation was chaotic. And during those first moments, Robert made a comment to the operator that would later become one of the many details examined. He said words to the effect of, "I think it must have been my son." It was a distressed reaction from someone who had just discovered a devastating scene. People respond differently in moments of shock. They process information differently. They speak before they have all the answers. When police arrived, they were not arriving at a confirmed murder scene. They were responding to a report of a woman who had apparently taken her own life. But the first officers entering the home didn't simply accept the explanation placed in front of them. They did what police are trained to do. They observed. They assessed. They considered the possibilities. And for some of those officers, something didn't feel right. Not a conclusion or an accusation. A concern. A feeling that the situation required careful examination. Constable Larry Blandford was one of the first officers inside the property. He was standing in a room where a young woman had died. His responsibility was to protect the possibility of finding out what happened. Several officers shared concerns with detectives about the scene. They believed that it needed to be treated carefully, that every possibility needed to remain open, that evidence needed to be preserved. And that's the foundation of any unexplained death investigation. Not deciding first, discovering first. At about 7:18 that night, Detectives Kirkman and Weedman stepped into the house. The winter air inside felt still. They moved through the rooms in silence, searching for signs of a struggle. An unbroken mirror lay on the floor, untouched as though it had simply been left there. Then they walked down the narrow hallway toward the main bedroom. The smell hit them before the room did, gunpowder lingering in the air. The bedroom door was only slightly open and could not be pushed fully inward. Something was blocking it. The detectives had to turn sideways and force their way through the gap. Amy was sitting against the wall behind the door. A towel covered her head. When they lifted it away, they saw a gunshot wound on the right side of her head and devastating injuries on the left. The shotgun was around 1.5 meters away. Other firearms stood in the corners of the room, and loose ammunition was scattered across the bedroom. Detective Kirkman, who had extensive firearms experience, examined the wound closely. It appeared consistent with the barrel having been pressed hard against Amy's head when it fired. The detectives looked for signs of a fight, disturbed furniture, broken objects, defensive injuries. They found none. To them, the scene appeared consistent with suicide. But one detail lingered. Amy's right hand was trapped beneath her body. Even Detective Kirkman later acknowledged that its position troubled him. That detail would become one of the most disputed aspects of the entire case. And with the detective's conclusion that the death was not suspicious, the protected forensic area was lifted. The room was no longer treated as an active crime scene. The scene could now be disturbed. A full forensic examination had not yet been conducted. A moment in time had already begun to disappear. Not long after the detectives left the house, David Simmons and Gareth Price returned to the property. David tried to go back inside, saying that he needed his mobile phone. Constable Blandford pointed to a black phone on a nearby table, but David said it wasn't his. "My phone is pink," he replied. The answer struck Blandford as strange. The officers refused to let David enter while Amy's body remained inside, and he and Gareth soon drove away into the night. Around 9 p.m, Amy was removed from the house. Before she was taken, police searched her for personal belongings, and inside her left sock, hidden against her skin, they found a pink mobile phone and a small amount of cash. Before leaving the property around 10 p.m, Senior Constable Ian Roberts and Constable Blandford spoke with Robert Simmons. He told them that he had entered the bedroom, unloaded the shotgun and placed the spent cartridge and a live round on the bedside table before seeing Amy's body. Blandford found that difficult to reconcile with what he had just experienced. Because to enter the room, officers had been forced to turn sideways and push against the door because Amy's body was blocking it. The account stayed with him. From the property, the officers drove to Nancy Kirk's house. They knocked on her door and told Amy's mother that her daughter's death had been deemed a suicide. Nancy was stunned. She told them Amy had only just called her. Amy had been crying and she said she wanted to leave David. Nancy had told her to pack her things and come straight over, stay the night, she had said. Amy never arrived. Despite the doubts expressed by several attending officers, the case was forwarded to the Coronial Investigation Squad as an unnatural but not suspicious death. And that decision would later come to haunt the investigation. Because as the days passed, questions began to gather around the case like shadows. Details were reconsidered. Timelines were re-examined. The circumstances no longer felt straightforward. The possibility that something else had happened could not be ignored. What had first been treated as an apparent suicide was now being viewed through a different lens. But by then, the scene had changed. And that would become one of the most important issues in Amy Wensley's story. A crime scene is not just a room. It's a frozen moment. The position of a body, the location of a weapon, the pattern of blood on a wall, and the relationship between every object in that space. Once those details are altered, they can't be recreated exactly as they were. And in Amy's case, a question would echo for years afterward. Had crucial evidence been lost before anyone realised that it needed to be preserved? Investigators began rebuilding the final hours of Amy's life piece by piece. They reviewed the witness statements, phone records and timelines. They examined her relationship with David, and they looked for anything that might explain how a young mother ended up dead in a bedroom while her daughters waited outside in a running car. Among all the evidence, one item stood apart: the photograph. The single image that was taken minutes before Amy died. And immediately the questions began. Why did she take it? Was it meant for someone? Was it a message? Or was it a private moment never intended to be seen? The photograph captured an instant. It did not capture an explanation. And that's the cruelty of evidence. People look at the final photograph and search for meaning. They try to read intention from an image, to understand a life through a frozen second. But evidence has limits. A camera records what was visible. It cannot reveal what was in a person's mind. The shotgun was examined. Experts studied its operation, its condition, and the physical possibilities surrounding its use. Could Amy have fired it herself? Could another person have been involved? The questions were examined carefully, and the answers were not simple. At the centre of everything was David Simmons, the last known adult with Amy before her death. He maintained that Amy had taken her own life. He denied killing her. His account was assessed alongside the statements of friends, family, police officers, and experts. For some, the evidence supported suicide. For others, the unanswered questions created doubt. And that uncertainty remained. Because the hardest truth in some investigations is not that the answer is hidden. It's that the answer may no longer be recoverable. For Amy's family, that uncertainty became its own form of grief. They didn't lose a case file, they lost a daughter. And at the centre of that loss are two little girls who sat in a car waiting for their mother to come back. They grew up without her. Birthdays passed, school years passed, milestones passed. Moments where they should have been able to look into a crowd and find their mum. Instead, they carried her absence. More than a decade later, Amy Wensley's story still raises difficult questions about investigators, evidence, and uncertainty. Not because people want theories, but because everyone understands something fundamental. When someone dies unexpectedly, the people left behind deserve answers. And when those answers cannot be found, the questions can remain forever. The property in Serpentine is quiet now. The police cars are gone. The emergency lights have long faded. But the questions remain with the people who loved Amy. The daughters who lost their mother. The family who lost their daughter. The friends who lost someone they cared about. Amy Wensley's story does not end with certainty. It ends with a young woman remembered, a mother remembered, a life remembered. Before there was a mystery, there was Amy. And that is the part of her story that should never be forgotten. Because behind every investigation is a family. Behind every case file is a person. And behind every unanswered question is somebody whose story mattered. This was the story of Amy Wensley, a young mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a woman whose final moments may remain uncertain, but whose life mattered completely. Not every case finds closure. Not every question gets answered. And sometimes the truth stays buried long after the headlines fade. This has been Coffee and Crime AU. For deeper into the case, Visit Coffee and Crime AU online. Until next time.